Hey folks, today we're going to be taking a look at Tinto Talks 7 for Project Caesar, aka EU5, and this is going to be our first look at how the economy is going to work. Johan already says in here that next week we're going to get a further in-depth look at how tax works, how the food system works, and some other things as well. But this is our first look at the economy, and then we're going to get a little bit more information about different aspects of it as we go through. In the future, we will get a lot more detail on how these systems work. I would imagine that's going to be when the game is officially announced, and we get formal dev diaries in the future. But this is our first look, and as always, I will be going through Johan's replies and doing a follow-up video either tomorrow or Friday. Again, Johan has done about 3 pages of replies already, so I'll go through those. I'll give him another day to think of some more answers, and then we'll cover them in a follow-up video. But let's just get straight into this one. As he says here, every month you have running incomes and expenses that need to be balanced for your realm. And if your balance is positive, your gold increases, and then you can invest that gold in other things, as pretty much all Paradox games work. And then the next line here, some people have taken as Johan kind of taken a pop at Victoria and some other games that Paradox make. As he says here, with balancing incomes and expenses, of course there are sliders. Having some buttons for just a few possible options for taxes and expenses, like an Imperador, is not really fitting for a grand strategy game with deep economical gameplay. As I said, some people think this is a bit of a pop at Victoria, but I'm not too sure. I think he's just saying, like, there are different ways we could do this, and this is the one that we've chosen on having sliders so you can kind of finesse it. I don't think he's having a go at one of the other game teams. I think he's just saying that's one way of doing it, and we're going to do it this way, but, you know, take it as you will. I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments down below. And then, as always, we get some fantastic art. Yeah, it's just a desk with a book and some coins, but the Paradox team always knock it out of the park with this kind of stuff. And then we are going to start with the income side of things. You have trade-related incomes, which is a system they're going to cover in early May. So we're not really going to get anything else around the trade system until that time. We've all kind of speculated how it might work, so we're going to have to wait a little bit longer, but not too long, to be honest. That's just next month, so we'll find out more then. As well as diplomatically related income. So that's talking about where, like, another realm, I guess, gives you money to support you, like you can in EU4 already. You can also gain gold from provinces that sell surplus food that they cannot store in their local market. So early game especially, I would think, if you're making a lot of food, you can sell that off, get a lot of income, and then spend that on other things. Would be interesting to see exactly how you could balance that. If you could have, like, a massive food-producing nation, you sell that food, you then use that gold to make a bigger army, and then you can use that to expand your realm rather than trying to do it some other way. I'm sure there's going to be many ways you can play the economy in this game. Neither of these, though, you can directly control with a slider. Talking about sliders being in the game, but these ones don't really work that way. There isn't really a slider of, well, do I want to starve my populace? I mean, to be honest, there probably could be one, couldn't there, where it's like, I'll take the unrest from that, save some money, because I want to export some additional food because I need it to support my army or something. I'm sure there will be some kind of mechanic like that potentially, because it would be kind of interesting to play out where you are like stingy at home with your own people because you want to expand further out, but we will find out more about that in the future. But the bulk of most countries' income will come through taxes, and taxes in Project Caesar are really different than before. First of all, every estate has a possible tax base, a concept that we'll dive into more detail next week. As I said, they're going to cover taxes in detail next week. Well, as much detail as we're going to get this early. This you can attempt to tax from them, but every estate has a maximum tax you can take from them, which depends on your laws and privileges and how much power you have in your country. They did cover this last week with, like, the control level. If they don't see you as being fully in control of an area, they can basically give you less money because they're like, well, you don't really control this. We'll give you like 60% of the tax, and we're going to keep the rest to invest as we want. The higher the tax you take from them, the lower the satisfaction equilibrium becomes. Some examples of tax affecting things include the Catholic region, which limits the taxes on clergy, and also the exilium et concilium. I've definitely butchered that pronunciation. A state privilege for the nobles, which can reduce the tax they pay, so you can balance it out, you know, take one thing, give them less taxes, kind of like how it works in Crusader Kings, in a way where you can take less tax and it makes them happier with you. I'm sure in EU5 there's going to be different mechanics around it, where you can take less money but they give you more troops, etc. All that kind of stuff. Finally, for something that has existed in some of our older games, we have minting. Now, what is that, you may ask? If you've not played any of these games, I guess you might wonder what it is. Minting is the possibility to just print more coins. It has a slight drawback, though, of increasing your inflation the more that you do it. This is how it works in EU4. Again, it might get a little bit of a tweak here, exactly how it works, but if you play EU4, you've seen this mechanic where you can just kind of print money. It increases your inflation kind of long term unless you fight against it, but in the meantime you do have that additional money coming in. And then they've got a screenshot here. It shows the income being 40 coins, and then we've got minting at 0, the nobility tax, the clergy tax. Interestingly, no clergy tax in this one, burgher tax, and the commoners tax as well, and then the other things that can affect it, so interest, trade income, diplomacy, selling food, mercenary income, and other income. So yeah, you can get mercenary income. So I guess that is very much like, is it the condottieri system in EU4 where you can kind of loan out troops to other nations? It looks like we are going to get that, and it's going to show nicely in this UI exactly what kind of income you're going to get from that. But as he said before, you're going to get the trade income, diplomacy, selling food. I can't imagine you're going to get a bunch of money from selling food, but again, it could be a cool campaign you could do to kind of focus on that and kind of use that to your advantage. Otherwise, you might be a nation that doesn't have enough food and you're importing it, and that's going to affect your ability to do other things with that money that you would have otherwise. Other than that, I quite like this UI. Again, as he said last week in the replies, everything here is work in progress. This is just a version of the UI that they have at the moment. He said basically everything here will probably look different at launch, although I think it will look roughly like this. It's obviously just going to get that polish, that EU4, EU5 kind of look to it. But everything that you can see here makes sense. It's showing the effect on the happiness, how much you're getting from each section. You've got the sliders there. It does look like, as he said, if you look at the commoner's tax, for example, he's got the slider at what, like 3/4 of the blue bar. So I imagine the light blue is how much you're taxing him. The dark blue, if you can see it just afterwards, is the maximum you could tax them. And then the dark blue black is like the tax that you can't give them at the moment, which will obviously change due to your laws and things, as they already said. That bar will obviously change as you continue through the campaign. And then what's the opposite of income? It is expensive. We all do love gaining gold, but sadly, we also have to spend it. And while we can reduce some of the spending, you cannot completely avoid all of it. We wish you could do that in real life, but no. And in this game, obviously, the same applies. First of all, they have the cost of the court. This is something that is directly correlated to the economy base of your country. And if you spend less gold than expected, your legitimacy or your equivalent applicable government power will decrease over time. And the more you spend, the more your legitimacy can increase. There are advances, laws, and other things that can affect how much you need to spend here. Obviously, if your country's seen as being very prestigious, you can't like skimp on how good your court is. Interesting again to see how this changes as the game progresses, and also if you're playing like a Merchant Republic, how does this change and things like that. But obviously this makes sense, I think. If you've played any kind of grand strategy game like this, you need to kind of show your own people and other nations that you're, you know, as prestigious as you say you are. And that's why you have these minimum requirements to spend. And if you go below that, people are going to see you as being a bit stingy and not really as good as you say you are. Then they have the cost for the standing army and navy, where spending less reduces their fighting capability. Again, a system that is in EU4. This is nothing new to Paradox Grand Strategy games. So Johan's like, I don't know why I mentioned it, because you all know this is going to be in here, but I guess like he just probably wants to confirm to people you are going to have the same mechanic that if you spend less on your army, they'll be less efficient at fighting. I guess he's just kind of calling out and kind of joking about it a little bit there. Fort maintenance is another common economic expense in Paradox games. And here it is as well. If you don't pay, your garrison just won't stick around. So again, similar to EU4, if you kind of mothball your forts, they basically don't exist until you start paying them. And even then, it takes time for them to tick up to being effective. But it looks like the same mechanic is returning here. And then next, we're going to talk about culture, which they did kind of tease last week in an answer. Johan kind of talked about it a little bit, but in EU5, this is going to be an entirely new concept, which will become available during the Age of Renaissance. So it sounds like you're not going to start with cultures at the beginning. Maybe as, you know, nations become more kind of, I don't know, self-aware of how nation building works and things like that, where they're going to see themselves as the French, the Germans, the Moroccans, etc. You get that kind of like nation building happening during this time. And it looks like from this, that's how it's going to work here as well. He does say here you can invest money into the system, but they're going to talk about it later. A little bit of a tease there that later on we are going to get one of these about culture, which makes sense. And this also does affect your prestige. So yeah, it does look like you don't start the game with kind of cultures how you would think about them in Crusader Kings again. During the Age of Renaissance, when kind of real nation building's happening, that's when you're going to start seeing these kind of ideas, I guess, populate through the map, where places are thinking like, we're Germans, etc. And that's going to be another mechanic that comes into the game, kind of spices the game up once that age starts. You can also decide how much you want to spend on your colonial charters, which is a new system which they're going to talk about later in the year. So it does look like colonial systems aren't going to be talked about for a couple of months. Again, I would imagine this is going to be a post-announcement dev diary or something like that, where they're going to talk about the colonial system, because there's a lot to cover in that. So I would think they want to do a couple of dev diaries back to back talking about the colonial system. But it does look like it's going to be a new system, and we'll see how it differs from EU4. Finally, the last thing that can affect your slider is your investment instability. The cost of how much your investments are needed depends on the size of your country, your different laws, and your societal values impacting them as well. Stability in itself has a range from plus 100 to minus 100, which will decay towards 0 on its own, which is interesting because, again, this was something Johan replied to a player, I think it was last week, it might have been the week before, where they were wishing it would work like Imperator Rome, which is basically how this is working, where you have a decay towards 0, and different actions can push it either negative or positive, and then it tries always to return to 0. Although I think, if I remember correctly, in Imperator, you could get certain things where it would naturally go higher than that, but the idea is it's at 0 and it kind of fluctuates left and right on the bar. And then there's obviously consequences to that. But that is our first confirmation, I guess, that I've seen anyway, where stability will work like it did in Imperator Rome in some aspects anyway. There are two other things that can affect your stability gain. Besides investing gold, as mentioned here, one of them relates to the cabinet system, but another is a more long-term impact from how your country is built up, as it is based upon how many clergy pops you have of your state religion compared to the total population. So it sounds like if you're super religious or not as a country, it is going to affect your base incomes, which again, in this time period, a lot of income was gathered by the church, so it does kind of make sense, and I guess how much you want to take out of the church as well. And then similar to income, we have a screenshot here of all the expenses with the sliders and kind of covering the different costs that you would generally see at the moment. So we have cost of court, which is nearly 9 gold, and that's given a plus 0.59 modifier. We've got army maintenance, navy maintenance, fort maintenance, culture, which again, no investment in, but it is given a prestige bump by the looks of it, cost of colonies, and stability itself. So all these you can kind of fine tune as you want, and I'm sure there's a lot of modifiers that it will affect and things like that. There's also paying interest, trade expense, diplomacy, buying food. So as I said earlier, you can be a nation where you're having to import food more than export it, hiring mercenaries and exploration costs. So if you're Portugal, etc., you are going to have those costs of exploring to found colonies, but then obviously you're going to get that income from your colonies. And then if you have a lot of food there, that's going to help you as well. You know, all these different systems kind of interacting with each other. And then he gives the examples here. Maybe we should cut down our fleet. Maybe we don't need all those forts. Our standing army of 200 brave footmen is more than enough. How do you want to do war if you're in a safe situation? Do you cut back all your expenses so you can then spend it into colony building, spend it into culture, etc., maybe importing some more things to make people happier, but then do you get caught out in a war and you're not ready for it and your army just gets decimated? So very much like EU4, you're gonna have to have that fine balance of how you want to do it. And then, as I said at the beginning, Johan next week is going to go over the tax-based functions, how the food system works, and other related issues. So basically just additional information on how the system works, especially around tax and the food system. The food system, I'm very interested to hear about because that could change how many campaigns go, how you play your nation. As I said before, different possibilities you could have depending on how that plays out. But that is it for the Tinto Talks 7 for this week. Our first look at the economy system. Let me know what you think down below. Everything I've seen so far I like. This is a refinement and an improvement on EU4 from what I've seen so far. And then obviously the little dig, I guess, maybe at Victoria 3. As I said, I'm sure you'll all comment about that down below. But yeah, we'll leave it there for today. As always, hit that like button if you've enjoyed it. I'm covering the Dev Diaries / Tinto Talks up to game launch and all that cool stuff. I also cover Crusader Kings 3 on the channel and other historical strategy games. So do subscribe if that's your kind of thing. But we'll leave it there, and I'll see you in the next one.